At 73, George Strait, the man the world knows as the king of country, faces a reality far more painful than any heartbreak he has ever sung about. For decades, fans have watched him command the stage with effortless charm, a quiet smile, and a voice that could make even the toughest hearts tremble. But now, behind the calm expression and the classic cowboy hat, something deeply troubling has unfolded, something George never wanted the world to see. Until now, George Strait built a life around simplicity, faith, family, music, and the belief that real strength comes from staying true to who you are. Yet life tested him in ways that would have broken most people. He faced moments that reshaped his heart forever, moments he rarely spoke about publicly, moments he quietly survived while the world continued cheering his name. And even now, at 73, new revelations about his emotional scars and the toll of his long journey paint a picture far more heartbreaking than anyone imagined. Today, we look beyond the fame, beyond the awards, beyond the more than 60 #1 hits. We step into the shadows of George Strait's life, the silent battles, the unimaginable pain, and the personal tragedy that changed him forever. This is the story fans were never fully told. This is the story behind the legend, and why the truth at 73 is more heartbreaking than ever. From the very beginning, George Strait never looked or acted like the kind of man destined for superstardom. He wasn't loud, he didn't chase attention, and he never relied on flashy gimmicks. Instead, he carried himself with a calm, almost shy confidence, the kind that made people lean in closer just to hear what he might say. Born in Potteet, Texas, and raised on a ranch in nearby Pearsall, George grew up with dirt roads, hard work, and the simple honesty of country life. While other kids dreamed of bright lights and big cities, George found his comfort in wide-open fields and the quiet rhythm of nature. His early world was shaped by the kind of values that became rare even in his time: loyalty, humility, and the belief that a man's word meant something. George's father was strict but loving, a steady presence who understood that discipline would build the foundation his son needed. But George's childhood wasn't perfect. When he was still young, his parents separated, leaving emotional marks he rarely discussed. He carried that early ache into adulthood, turning the unspoken pain into a deeper connection with the music he would eventually share with the world. In high school, George wasn't yet dreaming of a music career. His focus was on the simple things: friendships, responsibilities, and life on the ranch. But fate had other plans. When he joined a local garage band, something shifted. Standing behind a microphone felt surprisingly natural, almost like he'd discovered a piece of himself he didn't know was missing. Still, no one could have guessed the quiet teenager would someday become the biggest name in country music history. After graduation, George enlisted in the U.S. Army. It was during this chapter of his life that he started to understand the importance of resilience, the kind only learned through discipline, sacrifice, and leaving behind everything familiar. Stationed in Hawaii, he found himself thousands of miles from the Texas land he loved. But even far from home, music called to him again. He joined an Army-sponsored band called Ramblin' Country, and for the first time, George began exploring the idea of singing as more than a hobby. When his service ended, George returned to Texas with a renewed sense of purpose. He enrolled at Southwest Texas State University and formed a band called Ace in the Hole, a group that played small bars, college parties, and dusty dance halls. In those early days, George was just another struggling musician trying to be heard. Crowds were small, money was scarce, and rejection was constant. Many labels told him he wasn't marketable enough. They claimed he didn't fit the modern sound of country music, that his traditional style was outdated. But George refused to give up. Then came the moment that changed everything. In 1981, George finally signed with MCA Records. When he stepped into the studio to record his debut single, Unwound, something magical happened. His effortless voice, smooth, strong, and unmistakably pure, cut through the noise of the industry. With that one song, the cowboy from Texas suddenly had the world's attention. Within a year, he released his debut album Straight Country, and the industry quickly realized that George Strait wasn't here to follow trends. He was here to bring country music back to its roots. As his popularity exploded, George remained as humble as the young ranch hand he once was. He avoided scandals, stayed out of the tabloids, and preferred family time over Hollywood glitz. That grounded nature is what fans loved most about him. He felt real, stable, trustworthy. But the world had no idea that, behind his rising fame, George was about to face a tragedy so devastating it would permanently change him, his music, and his outlook on life. As George Strait's career soared through the 1980s, the world saw a man who seemed unshakable. Hit after hit, sold-out show after sold-out show. He carried the image of a steady Texas cowboy who could handle anything. But behind the stage lights, beyond the applause, George was living a life devoted to just one thing above fame: his family. His wife, Norma, whom he had loved since high school, and their two children, Jennifer and George Jr., were the center of his world. No matter how busy his schedule became, he always made time to return home, the one place where life felt simple and whole. But on June 25, 1986, George's world shattered in a way that no amount of fame or success could cushion. That summer night, their 13-year-old daughter Jennifer was riding in a car with friends when the driver lost control. The vehicle flipped, and in a heartbreaking instant, George Strait's little girl, the child he adored, the light of his home, was gone. The news spread quickly, but the real devastation happened inside the walls of the Strait family home. Far from cameras or headlines, the man who had always stood tall, who had always been composed and steady, fell into a grief so deep that it altered him permanently. George has rarely spoken publicly about Jennifer's death, not because he didn't want to honor her, but because the pain was simply too heavy. Every interview, every spotlight, every question felt like a wound reopening. That silence became his way of coping. Instead of talking, George poured his heartbreak into quiet reflection and into music that carried a depth fans could feel even if they didn't fully understand the source. In the months following the tragedy, George considered stepping away from the industry altogether. The touring life felt meaningless without Jennifer there to greet him when he returned home. Friends described him as distant, withdrawn, and lost in a sadness that no one could touch. Even Norma, who shared the same grief, struggled to reach him at times. Yet somehow, George found a way to keep moving, not because he wanted fame or success, but because he needed to keep living for the family he still had. The turning point came when he and Norma created the Jennifer Lynn Strait Foundation, a charity dedicated to helping children's organizations. Through this foundation, they honored her memory in a way that felt genuine, meaningful, and close to the heart. It became a quiet reminder that even in the darkest moments, Jennifer was still making a difference in the world. But grief has a way of reshaping a person from the inside out. After Jennifer's passing, George Strait changed. Fans felt it even without knowing why. His songs carried more weight, more emotion, more sincerity. Tracks like Baby Blue and later You'll Be There resonated with an almost haunting sense of loss and longing, reflections of a father who had lived through every parent's worst nightmare. He also began pulling away from the public eye. Interviews became rare. He avoided personal discussions. Fame no longer mattered. What mattered was protecting what remained of his family. His heart had been broken in a place that would never fully mend, and from that moment on, George carried that silent sorrow everywhere he went, in his music, in his eyes, and in the way he quietly stepped back from the world that once celebrated him so loudly. But this tragedy, as devastating as it was, would not be the only moment that reshaped George Strait's life. As he grew older, new challenges, health struggles, and emotional battles emerged, tests that would push the already wounded cowboy even closer to the edge. As George Strait entered his 60s and eventually his early 70s, fans continued to see him as the steady, unshakable cowboy, the man who could ride through storms, heartbreak, and the relentless demands of fame without faltering. But behind the public image, George was quietly facing a series of battles that the world never saw coming. Grief had left its permanent mark, but time and health would test him in entirely new ways, proving that even legends are not immune to life's harshest realities. Over the years, George began noticing changes in his body. Long days on stage, the constant touring, and decades of carrying emotional weight started to take a toll. He experienced fatigue that couldn't be shaken off by rest, and minor injuries from performances seemed to linger longer than they should. For someone who had spent his life in peak condition, ranch work, riding horses, and performing night after night, it was an unwelcome reminder of his own mortality. Even more quietly, George struggled with sleep issues, anxiety, and the kind of stress that comes from carrying decades of emotional burdens in silence. Friends and close colleagues describe him as a man who refused to complain, even when pain became part of his daily life. His routine remained disciplined, family first, music second, and only then anything else. But those who saw him up close began noticing subtle changes. He became more reserved, often declining interviews, public appearances, and award shows. Fans noticed it too. His once exuberant stage presence had softened, replaced by a slower, more measured energy. Yet on stage, he still gave everything, hiding his vulnerabilities behind the familiar smile and hat that had become his signature. Adding to the challenge, George faced the natural weight of aging while remaining in a profession that glorifies youth and vitality. Every performance, every tour, and every television appearance reminded him that he had to fight against time itself. He pushed forward, driven not by ego, but by the love of music and the desire to continue sharing it with fans. But behind closed doors, the reality was more complex. A man who had survived tragedy and loss now faced the invisible burden of a body and mind that were no longer as invincible as they once seemed. Despite these hardships, George found solace in family and faith. Norma remained his anchor, their marriage a quiet testament to enduring love. His children, now grown, became pillars of support, understanding that their father's silence often carried the heaviest weight. And when he returned to the stage, even in a limited capacity, George Strait reminded the world why he had earned the title King of Country. Every note he sang carried a depth and authenticity shaped by decades of triumph, heartbreak, and resilience. Yet the combination of grief, aging, and health challenges painted a picture far more heartbreaking than most fans realized. Beneath the cowboy hat, behind the legendary voice, George Strait was a man navigating the relentless passage of time, the lingering pain of personal loss, and the quiet sorrow of battles only he could truly know. This chapter of his life, though invisible to the public eye, would leave a lasting mark, shaping not just the music he sang, but the man he had become. At 73, George Strait stands as one of the most iconic figures in country music history, a man whose career has spanned over 5 decades, countless chart-topping hits, and millions of adoring fans. Yet the triumphs, the awards, and the record-breaking tours tell only a small part of the story. Behind the cowboy hat and the legendary voice lies a life marked by profound heartbreak, invisible struggles, and a quiet resilience that few outside his inner circle fully understand. Even in the face of personal tragedy, George has chosen to focus on what matters most: family, faith, and the music that has always been his true companion. His wife, Norma, has remained his unwavering partner through the darkest moments. From the loss of their daughter Jennifer to the relentless pressures of fame and aging, together they have created a sanctuary away from the spotlight, a space where George can be himself, a father, a husband, and a man carrying wounds that will never fully heal. His children, now adults, have witnessed both the depth of his grief and the strength he draws from it. They have learned that the quietest people often carry the heaviest burdens, and George's life has become a testament to enduring love and perseverance. Even with health challenges and the natural strains of aging, George continues to perform selectively, connecting with audiences in ways that are deeply personal. Every note he sings carries decades of emotion, the joy of youth, the pain of loss, and the wisdom that only time can bring. Fans may see the smiles, the smooth voice, and the classic cowboy charm, but behind it all lies a man who has endured heartbreak and emerged not broken, but profoundly human. His music now carries a depth that resonates on a level far beyond entertainment. It is a mirror to his life, a reflection of sorrow, resilience, and quiet triumph. Beyond the stage, George Strait's legacy is also one of generosity and compassion. Through foundations, charitable work, and private gestures of support, he has honored the memory of his daughter and used his influence to help others. These acts are not publicized with fanfare, yet they speak volumes about the character of a man who has faced unimaginable grief and chosen to turn it into purpose. At 73, the tragedy of George Strait is undeniable, not because of scandal, failure, or misfortune, but because of the private battles, the silent heartbreak, and the unspoken weight he has carried for decades. Yet within that tragedy lies a remarkable story of endurance, humility, and love. His life reminds us that true strength is not measured by fame or fortune, but by the courage to face suffering with dignity, the ability to persevere through loss, and the choice to keep giving, even when the world sees only the surface. George Strait may have experienced tragedy beyond what words can capture, but he continues to walk forward with the quiet grace of a cowboy who has known heartbreak, carried it, and turned it into something enduring. His story is more than music. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a legacy that will echo long after the applause fades.